in my experience, when you think about, or at least when I think about situations that have been very difficult to be involved in, where you know, a patient has been given a very poor prognosis and there's been really aggressive care that has been delivered much in a way where you know, it just doesn't feel right, or it doesn't feel appropriate for what the patient is facing. I found that in those situations, typically, that is very much driven, oftentimes not necessarily by overly aggressive treatment recommendations from the caregivers in the hospital environment or anything like that. It's typically more because there's a lack of general acceptance of you know, the reality of the situation by family members. And so you know, family members that are just, you know, have very intact denial of a patient's proximity you know, to the terminal nature of their illness, will you know, just ask for very aggressive interventions. And it's, you know, I mean, it's very natural for us to want to be able to, as humans, kind of cling to, you know, to the good news and the prospect of a positive outcome. And I think, you know, there are times whenever our own, you know, biological reality, you know, kind of points us in a different direction. And so when there's denial, really with regards to the family members that are confronted with this, that can result in, you know, just pretty aggressive measures continuing, you know, that are really not necessarily in the big picture beneficial for the patient.
The magical thinking is that, geez, if we just get through this pneumonia, he'll have a couple of months at home, and those will be good months. If we can just get through this pneumonia, and it just hasn't happened. He's out for a couple of weeks, and he's back in, he's back. And the magical thinking is that the time that they have at home is so good that it's probably worth that most of the time being in the hospital. If we could just get the secretions managed a little better, if we just use the right antibiotic for long enough, you know, all of these kind of solutions they're going to change the status quo. But they don't change the status quo.
A piece of the problem is that people are just so unaware of what awaits them as they get very old. We don't tell stories of old people, you know, and when we do, it's, you know, a 15-minute segment on ER or something like that. But we don't tell what happened to Ronald Reagan as he died with dementia, what happened to Barry Goldwater as he died with dementia. We don't follow the story of somebody who's had a bad stroke. So when it comes at this person and family, they have to make it up because they don't have any experience, not even the vicarious experience of it being in the movies and on television and talked about at the water fountain. So they foolishly rely on doctors who mostly are trying to fix things. And there comes a point at which a lot of things can't be fixed. It must have been so different 100 years ago when most women would have buried children, most people would have buried siblings by the time they grew up. You know, most adults had lots of experience of death, even just being on a farm and slaughtering animals and so on. Whereas now, most people don't really have any experience of death till they themselves are fairly old, and they're the family member of an even older person who is dying. And so their whole experience is that experience, which is usually very medicalized. So they think that resort to the medical system is going to be supportive and helpful, and have not really had even the story told of what would happen otherwise.
The biggest mistake is everyone's trying to protect everyone else. And everyone knows, but no one wants to talk to the others. So the family is protecting their loved one from the reality of what's happening. The loved one living in the body that's going through this, they know better than anyone else what's happening. But they're trying to protect their family. The doctor tends to be taking cues on openness of communication, either from the patient or the family. So there's this sort of kabuki dance of silence and euphemism around what's happening.
You know, what it would take for most of us to have more appropriate dying, I think, would be a lot more familiarity with it. You know, we need characters. Remember when there was a popular television show called The Golden Girls? Well, I want to see The Golden Girls 20 years later, you know, and, you know, Maude would be in a wheelchair, still cracking jokes about sex. and knowing that she was going to die of the next stroke or whatever. But we don't do that. We sort of clean everything up.